Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Friday morning. We're very excited to have you with us today to discuss a very serious topic, but we think it is one that is important, and we want to make sure that we set you all up with tools and resources to help you with your clients and their families. Um, before we get started, I am just going to go over our normal housekeeping information. So, my name is Elizabeth Matthews. Most of you know me at this point, but I am your host for today, and we have with us Dr. Martha Mason, who will be our speaker today. She has provided some great resources, so I want to make sure we take some time to go over those. If you are looking at your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a section titled Handouts, and attached to that section are 4 PDF documents. There are 3 flyers. There are 2 flyers and 1 kind of like a survey, like a worksheet type document. And then we also gave you a copy of the slides. So take a couple of moments before we get started and grab those documents out of the handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel and save those so that you can have them in the future. If for some reason you are unable to download them or you just forget to at the end of the call, we will have them posted up on the WSC page of the APD website. It'll probably be this afternoon, just so you know. They'll be there, or you could grab them this morning, but I just wanted to let you know those resources are there for you. Also, if you are joining us today for continuing education credit, as always, there will be an assessment at the end of this presentation. I will provide the testing link to you at the end. So if you need that credit, go ahead and stay on till the end, and we'll go over all of the testing information at that time. So I think at this point we have given our latecomers enough time to join and get settled in. So I am going to pass this over to Dr. Mason. She is our state office psychologist and a very wonderful speaker. So I hope you guys enjoy your time with her. We are hoping that this becomes a very interactive presentation. We're going to pause throughout the presentation and ask for your thoughts and your opinions about these things. So please utilize the chat box. And of course, if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, send them in and we will do our best to get to them at the end. So Dr. Mason, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, so much, and good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Mason, and I'm very happy to be here with you today, speaking with you about this topic. In order to piggyback off what Elizabeth said, I encourage all of you to ask questions, and to that end, after each bubble, as you see here on the screen, we're going to pause and give everyone a chance to ask a question about what I just said. So please feel free to do that, and Elizabeth will be screening your questions. My purpose here today, hopefully, is to give you some information. I'm not going to load you down with the typical suicide statistics that are readily available on the internet or in some of these sources that we're going to give you. I'm going to give you a few because I think they're relevant and interesting, but the main goal is to help you feel comfortable if you're faced with this situation, that you know what to do. You don't feel caught off guard or scrambling. You feel comfortable in dealing with this situation in the appropriate way. So to that end, let's get started. And let's talk first a little bit about intellectual disability and people with developmental disabilities. I know that you deal with this a lot. There has been an old notion that people with intellectual disability kind of have a buffer against suicide. They don't commit suicide at the same rate as people do in the general population. But that's not true. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of research on people that have intellectual disability and suicide rates. We do have some, and that shows us that they do commit suicide at the same rates as people, other people do. There is an increased risk of suicide, I believe, among adolescents with ID, as well as physical and learning disabilities, just because of the challenges that they face. In particular, our population is susceptible to victimization, bullying, peer pressure, undue influence, isolation. So this increases their risk factors for suicide. In addition, individuals with ID often have, just like everyone else, comorbid mental health disorders. But because of impaired capacity and sometimes insight, they might not have the coping resources that some other people have, or the knowledge to manage that. Unfortunately, I've seen sometimes, and maybe you have witnessed this yourself, when we try to get help for individuals with developmental disabilities in the community, there's this false belief that they cannot benefit from mental health treatment. And that's just simply not true. They absolutely can. I've worked with these individuals, and I think their insight can be very surprising, but also just being a supportive person, someone that they can talk to. So even if it's just supportive therapy, it can be so helpful to them. So here are a few statistics. 45% of people who die by suicide have seen a health provider in the month before their death. That's pretty staggering. Almost 50% of people who die by suicide actually had contact with a health provider, and that could be a mental health provider, or it could be their physician. I know some physicians I've seen now are integrating mental health into their practice, and when you go in, they're giving people kind of a modified Beck inventory to assess their risk for depression and things like that. So I was glad to see that medical providers are now trying to become more aware of people who are experiencing depression and have a conversation with them about that. Because everyone may, all of us, we might go see a doctor every now and then, but sometimes it's a little more difficult to reach out for mental health services if you don't know where to turn or who to call. And there can be some stigma related to that as well. 20% of suicide victims have had contact with mental health services before their death. That's concerning as well. Men are more likely to die by suicide, and women are more likely to attempt suicide. So why is this? Men typically have access to lethal means, or this is the mode that they typically use, by gun, by hanging, things like that. Women who attempt suicide in general are more likely to do so by poisoning. So because of the method that they choose, men are more likely to die by suicide. Males 85 plus have the highest rates of suicide. So we really have to watch out for our older population. and females between 45 and 54 had the highest non-fatal hospitalization rates. There are probably a lot of factors that figure into that, but and certainly a statistic that is not referenced here is the growing number of our youth that are committing suicide. It's of great concern. Also, the fact that COVID and the isolation that has imposed upon everyone is very frightening. A lot of people are feeling isolated and hopeless, and that contributes to our suicide rate as well. So with that, I'm going to stop before we get into our risk factors and see if anyone has a comment. If you have a comment or a question, please feel free before we move on. Are we good, Elizabeth, on questions?
Yep, so far I don't see anything in our chat box. And just a reminder to send in your messages, look for that chat box. It will send directly to me. Everyone else in the webinar will not be able to see your message. So if you feel like you want to send something privately, it is private. So
thank you.
Just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about risk factors for suicide. So certainly if there's a family history of suicide, and this even could be maybe not only a relative, but if you've known a friend, a close friend that committed suicide, this is a risk factor. Child maltreatment, history of a mental disorder, hopelessness, and I'm going to come back to that one, loss, and unwillingness to seek help due to a stigma or other barriers to mental health treatment. And I mentioned that a little bit before. We really need to make sure that when we're encouraging people to seek mental health treatment, that we try to normalize that for individuals. Because unfortunately, you know, you hear phrases like, oh, you need therapy, or you're so bipolar. And I really discourage using that kind of language, because it just, that kind of vernacular really adds to the stigma of mental health treatment, which is actually very healthy and so helpful to so many people, whether you have a mental health disorder or not. I've worked with individuals who were just going through a very difficult time in their life and needed someone objective to help them, not necessarily because they had any kind of mental health disorder. So we really need to encourage people to seek mental health treatment and normalize that. Substance abuse and addiction is a risk factor, and also legal involvement. So I think when you consider the people that you work with, you probably see a lot of these risk factors in those individuals. I want to go back to hopelessness, because this is one of the signs when I see it that is very concerning. Hope is probably one of the strongest barriers against suicide. When we have lost hope, when we cannot see a way out, we feel like there's nothing on the horizon. This is a very strong warning sign that there is something wrong. Anything that you can do to help with that is also very meaningful to an individual. And we'll go into protective factors with that. So some of these protective factors you see are kind of the opposite of the risk factors. So a protective factor is effective clinical care. Okay, if we see someone struggling with depression, loss of hope, we really want to encourage them to seek out a professional, or even just a support system. Nowadays, it's relatively easy to be able to connect with resources for telehealth. So someone who might fear going into an office or something like that, they can maybe do so now via Zoom or another video method, and they can connect with a counselor. Easy access to clinical interventions, support from ongoing medical and mental health relationships, coping skills. This is a big one. Problem solving, nonviolent ways to solve conflict. So a therapist can certainly help with coping skills, but I'm sure many of you have coping skills that you utilize that when you're working with individuals, you can share with them. Cultural beliefs that discourage suicide, and employment. That is interesting because we just celebrated some spectacular employers that promote people and employ people that have disabilities. So helping clients become employed, and if they cannot become gainfully employed, because I know that can be difficult, especially during these times, helping them volunteer or have some kind of meaning to their life, to be productive, to feel like they are making a difference, even if it's mentoring a peer or writing to a pen pal, helping another person, even just helping another person in their living environment or their group home in some small way. I think everyone likes to feel like they are needed and the things that they do in their life matter. Okay, and with that, we're going to pause before the next bubble and give people a chance to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, so Dr. Mason, we did have a question come in, and maybe you could speak to this in addition to just answering the question. The question is, are we going to give resources for people affected by the loss of a loved one to suicide? So I can't remember if the resources we provided identify anything for that specific topic, but maybe you have some tips or suggestions.
Yes, so definitely the loss of a loved one to suicide. That is the most heartbreaking and one of the most painful issues to deal with, because not only are you dealing with the loss, but you know, you're wondering, there's always guilt, you know, was it because of me? Did I not see anything? You know, that's very difficult. If you know someone that has experienced that loss, they really, really do need all the support that they can get. And that includes referring them to a mental health professional that can talk with them about that. I think another thing that you could do as well is let everyone in their environment know, hey, we need to give some extra support to this person. We need to talk. It shouldn't be, sometimes in families, you know, things like this aren't really talked about, or, you know, you just don't discuss it and you try to move on. And that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. We need to talk about it. We need to follow up with that person. They need to be referred to mental health services. And we need to keep a close eye. And we do have some resources in these flyers that you're going to see some numbers that they can call to get referrals to mental health treatment. 211 is an excellent resource. That's also in your handouts. There's resources on our APD website, including that suicide prevention flyer. So we need to just really rally around that person, help them. And that's a good question. I think it's a very difficult topic to deal with. But since we know that that is such a strong risk factor, and it depends upon each individual too, and how many risk factors they have and what they're expressing. And we have another flyer, and I'll talk about that in a minute, the Columbia Suicide Screener. But we need to make sure we increase supervision, and we also remove any lethal means if that's what we're looking at as well with the individual. So I know that wasn't a succinct answer maybe to the question, but I hope that covered all of the bases there. if there's a particular individual that you're speaking about and concerns, I would also, if you have a scenario that you want to discuss, I'd be happy to discuss that as well.
Thank you. So a few other comments came in. We have a support coordinator who is asking just for more resources or footnotes supporting studies for the statistics that you were talking about earlier, specifically the men are more likely to die by suicide and women are more likely to attempt. And so if you have that afterwards, I'll be happy to share that with everyone.
Sure, there is a flyer there. I think it's called Suicides, and that references some of those there. But if you would like further studies, I have a plethora of research and information, and my contact information is included at the end. So I would be happy to load you down, so to speak. If you want more resources, I'd be happy to send those.
And then one other question came in before we move on to the next bubble. Sorry, I'm trying to read as I talk.
That's okay.
She asks, is overdose by accident due to substance abuse addiction considered suicide or accidental overdose?
I think that would depend on the person recording that data, but typically I would say that that's considered an accidental overdose. And sometimes it's a good question, because that's a little bit difficult to tease apart, because how do you really know the mindset of the individual that overdosed? So it kind of depends upon the judgment of the person that's recording that death. And certainly substance abuse, that's a whole nother ball game. But you know, individuals that go into treatment and they come out can overdose if they relapse very easily, because they go back to the same amount that they were using when they went into treatment. Well, now they've been in treatment maybe 30 days or longer, and they're clean, and that dose can be lethal that they were taking before. So unfortunately, it's heartbreaking. I've seen some people come out of treatment and relapse, and they accidentally kill themselves. And I want to get into as well, there is a small subset of our population that they say they're suicidal a lot. And some of this behavior can be attention seeking. So, but how do you know? How do you know if it's attention seeking or not? And let's just say it's purely attention seeking, and we don't find a way to get that individual the attention that they need. What if they progress their action and say, well, this isn't working, I'm going to up my game and let them know I'm serious, I really need this attention, and they accidentally wind up really hurting themselves or killing themselves. So that is something really to be aware of as well with those with that subset of our population. We really need to find a way to help them have better coping skills and to get the attention that they need in a more adaptive way.
There's one more question that I think should be addressed in this section rather than your next one, so I'm going to go ahead with that before we move on.
Sure.
A support coordinator asked, how important are taking mental health days off from work, specifically support coordinators who work on call?
Well, I say mental health days are very important. And we, Dr. Karenko and myself did a presentation not too long ago about coping with stress, especially during these times. And gosh, I so wish that this group could attend that as well, since you had that question. I will say you really have to pay attention to yourself and be aware. If you're burnout, it's just like the old example with the oxygen coming down from the airplane. You know, you have to take that oxygen first before you give it to your child or another person that's with you, because if you are depleted, you can't help anyone else. So if you find yourself not sleeping at night, you're dreaming about work, you're under a lot of stress, you're irritable, you're not as focused, you're making careless mistakes, I could go on and on. It's time to take a break. I think it's really important to try to integrate self-care daily, so you don't get to that point where you have to say, gosh, you know, I just can't deal with this. Because you might take a day off, but how are you going to maintain if you don't add that self-care into every day? So I don't know, Elizabeth, maybe this is something that we could do for our waiver support coordinators. We could do that training for them again and talk about self-care and some different things that they could do. But daily self-care and every now and then taking some time off for yourself is very important.
I think that's a great idea, and I'm getting a lot of positive comments coming in for that topic. So we can definitely put that on the schedule for the next couple of months. We'll find some time for it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's, everyone who's been commenting and sending information, keep at it, but we're going to move on to our next section, and we'll reconvene in just a few moments.
All right. So here's the big one, the meat of it. What can I do if someone is suicidal? You might say, I'm not a doctor, I can't Baker Act them, whatever. But you can listen without judging. You know, you wouldn't ever want to tell someone who's saying, I'm suicidal, you know, that, oh, no, you're not. You're not going to do anything. You know, you want to listen to them and say, well, tell me what's going on. Why are you thinking like that? What's going on in your mind? Be empathetic, because there could be things going on with them that might not be upsetting to you. Empathy is different from sympathy. You're trying to kind of put yourself in that person's place and say, well, I guess if I were this person, that would be upsetting to me too. And I'm sorry you're going through that right now. Explore their personal supports. Help them think a little bit. Well, I'm talking to you. Are there other people in your life you can talk to? Who do you go to when you're having problems? And who do you like to talk to? Do not be afraid to ask questions, because just because you ask questions about suicide is not going to give someone the idea to commit suicide. So don't be afraid to fully explore it with them. And we'll talk about this screener here. I like this screener because it's small, it's quick, it's succinct, and really once you look at it, it's not like you have to carry it around in your pocket. You can kind of get an idea of the questions that you need to ask to determine if someone is really at high risk, and this is included in your resources. Follow through with them even if it seems like the crisis is over and they're calm. Don't leave them alone. Make sure that there is someone available to them, someone there. If the client, let's say they're in a supported living situation, they live alone or whatever, we'll talk about the screener, but we need to make sure that we don't leave them by themselves, okay? Let staff and other people know what's going on with them. Don't send an email. Don't say, oh, I think this person might be going through something. Send an email to somebody. Make a call. Make those calls, and make sure you talk to someone who is involved directly with this person, and follow up yourself if you can, okay? We have a lot of resources, as I said earlier, on the website. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our agency and our involvement with suicide prevention efforts. I am exceptionally proud of our agency. Our director has very much recognized the need for suicide awareness and prevention. In particular, not only the consumers we serve, but their families and caregivers as well. They are under a great deal of stress. And it's only gotten worse, right? Everyone, I think, is under more stress than usual. So to that end, our agency is involved with the Suicide Prevention Coordinating Council and other committees in order to increase awareness, not just for our population, but all over the state of Florida. So you're going to see some information on the website about resources, who to call. We're doing more trainings like this one, and it's only going to get bigger and more broadly available as time goes on. So I'm very happy and excited about that. Okay, so let's take a look at this screener. This is meant for anyone to use. You can use this with a family member, a consumer. These are kind of some questions that you can ask, and it opens the conversation if you think someone is suicidal, or they've even actually expressed that they want to harm themselves. Hold on just a moment, please. Okay. So this is a way that you can kind of talk to them about it, and you don't necessarily have to say, are you suicidal? So if you look at this, if anyone responds to the affirmative in any of these red questions, they are at high risk of suicide, okay? That's when we really need to be concerned. They don't need to be left alone, okay? Any yes here is concerning in the yellow, okay? That's a concern. And you're probably going to hear a lot of people that you would ask, they might say, yeah, I've thought about it before, okay? Any yes here is they're at moderate risk, okay? So you go through and you just kind of ask, have you ever wished you were dead, or you could just go to sleep and not wake up? You know, what happened? When was that? You know, are you feeling that way now? Have you ever actually had thoughts of killing yourself? When you go to intent, these higher risk areas, intent and means are the main things that you really should be concerned about, and that's when a Baker Act might be considered. So if you thought about killing yourself, have you thought about like how you might do it? Okay, because it's one thing to feel bad, and that's not good, and say, gosh, I wish I just wouldn't wake up sometimes. It's another to go a step further and start thinking about, well, I have these pills in the cabinet, and I know Dad has a gun in the house. And, you know, if you're thinking, you're starting to develop a plan, okay? Have you started to work out or worked out the details to kill yourself? Do you intend to do it? That's an important question to ask. And here, have you ever done anything, started to do anything, or prepared to do anything to end your life? Okay. How long ago was it? You know, was it several years ago? And here's the big one. Was it within the past 3 months? So if they say yes to that, we really probably need to make sure this person is safe. We need a plan to keep them safe. And a lot of that depends on who is in their environment, what is their level of supervision. If we can't keep them safe in the environment that they're in now, then they probably need to be hospitalized, okay? Are there any questions about that or anything else I've said?
Yeah, we had a few come in, mostly about the resource, yes. So some more generalized questions. What do you do if they don't want to talk about their answers to these questions? And also, is it best practice to have open-ended questions rather than just yes or no?
Yeah, you can ask this in any way you want. Some people do better with closed-ended questions. You will know how to approach that individual if you know them. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I think these questions are a little more direct and you can follow up with open-ended questions. Okay, like, have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself? And they say yes. You kind of need to really be able to ask that question, then say, well, tell me about that, and let them talk. Okay. So I'm glad you asked that question, because open-ended questions do inspire conversation, free flow of ideas. And sometimes when you ask a yes or no, you don't get as much information. But it is important to kind of ask these questions here more directly to get a yes or no answer. But then, yes, certainly follow up with open-ended questions and get more information.
And what if they don't want to talk? What if it's someone who just chooses not to tell you or not to talk to you about it?
So thank you for that question. That can be that's very scary, because that could mean that they already have a plan and they don't want you to know about it. So we need to make sure that person's safe. We really do. If because if you're getting to the point where you're talking to someone about suicide, there's a reason. Something's happened. We saw some risk factors. We saw their behavior change in some way. These are things to look out for, right? And if they just don't want to talk to you about it, then we need to make sure that person is safe. So again, that, it all boils down to, what is their level of supervision? Can this person be watched? Do they have access to lethal means? Can we remove those lethal means? And if we can't provide good supervision and remove access to lethal means, then they need to be hospitalized. So if someone's made an attempt and they just don't want to talk about it, or we have some of these other questions in play, we know they've come into play, we need to keep them safe.
And how do you balance trust and disclosure when you're talking about intimate issues like suicide?
Trust and disclosure, yeah. So, I'm assuming that the question you're asking means, how much do you disclose about your own personal experiences? Is that what you're talking about?
I think, and the individual who sent that question in, you can definitely clarify. I'll be able to see your explanation. But the way that I read it is, how do you balance having the trust of your client, but also finding the additional support for that person? So if you know something is going on, how do you share that information without breaking the trust of your client?
Gotcha. Okay. So I'll tell you what I have done as a therapist, and because you don't want to violate the trust you have with that person. Okay. So I would talk to that person and tell them what your concerns are. Hey, I'm really concerned about you, and I feel like we need to get some other people involved. Is it okay if I help you? Can we talk to so and so, because I care about you and I want you to be safe. So not letting them know what you're going to do doesn't violate the trust. And if they say, no, I don't want you to tell anyone, you can't tell anyone what I'm telling you, but they've told you that they want to harm themselves. you have to just be upfront and honest and just say, I understand that you don't want anyone else to know. I so appreciate you talking to me about it, but I want to keep you safe. I want to keep you safe. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I want you to be around. And I am going to have to talk to someone. And you just be straight up and honest with them. There is a lot of distrust, not just in our population, but in general. I've had patients not want to tell me things because they were afraid I might Baker Act them or what have you. And I'm so glad they finally told me, because I'm like, I just tell people up front, I'm not going to Baker Act you behind your back. You're going to know. I would tell you if you're involved in this plan, you're involved in your treatment. I would never do anything like that without talking to you first. That doesn't mean I have to have their acquiescence. That just means, you're involved and I'm talking to you first. So as long as we keep people involved, we are upfront and transparent with them, then you don't have to worry about violating their trust. They might not like the decision that you made, but if you tell them with kindness and empathy that the intention is to keep them safe because you care about them, I think that goes a long way.
So another question came in regarding if you have to call for an officer, if you have to call 911, what would you recommend when you call 911? Can you specifically request that an officer have training in mental health? What would you do?
Of course. Yes, of course, you absolutely could request it. And I hope that they would have someone available that could do that. I think giving that 911 operator all the information up front, this is, the person, and they're telling me this. If you have someone that is knowledgeable about mental health, you could send that person. If you have an emergency situation, you have to call 911, and trying to give them all of that information up front is good. You don't have to disclose what their diagnosis is or anything like that, but to let the person know, hey, we really need someone with this experience, if at all possible, and give them as much information as you can. And I would even go so far, if there is or is not a weapon involved, they need to know that as well. We don't need any misunderstandings. We've seen in the news heartbreaking stories of someone who was killed because law enforcement thought they had a weapon when they did not, and things like that. So, yeah, if you have to do that, that's a good idea.
And there's one more question before we move on, I think is important to address. Do you feel that suicide education is important to add to ongoing education for individuals so they are well informed if peers are at risk? And if you do feel that way, what's the best way to discuss that with them?
So yes, I absolutely do feel that ongoing education is important because it keeps it fresh in your mind. So when you have trainings kind of intermittently and things like that, we tend to move on. Some things we might remember, some we don't. And I'm glad you asked that question, because our agency is involved now in developing a training for regular ongoing yearly suicide prevention and awareness. And that's going to happen as part of like a continuing education, something that our employees, APD employees, see all the time. Now, for waiver support coordinators, I think we should also be doing that, because while you might not be employees of the agency, you absolutely are an essential and integral part of the agency, and you have direct contact with these clients regularly. So yes, we are doing that as part of our work with the Suicide Prevention Coordinating Council. So regular trainings are coming your way. And there was a second part to that question that
Yes, it was more about how to educate consumers so that they can be aware of things going on with their friends and their peers.
that is a good question. I think that it all depends on the person. I think teaching our consumers to be a good friend and to let other people know if you think something's wrong with your friend can be the most helpful education. Letting them know that if their friend says they want to commit suicide, it's not being a good friend to keep that secret. So having open discussions about that, you know, it's just like one of you asked just a second ago, how can I let someone else know what's going on without violating their trust? And I'm sure our consumers would have the same concern if they had a close friend and they said, hey, I want to kill myself, but I don't want you to tell anyone. They might feel like they're being a friend by not doing that. And they should be telling someone that's what a real friend does. So I think just letting them know how to be a good friend and when to let someone know if something's going on.
Great, thank you. Yes. Okay, so let's move on to, I think, our last bubble. And of course, everyone keep sending in your comments and questions. We will do our best to get through them.
So these resources are also in your handouts. These are, I know there's a plethora of other resources, but these are my favorite. And in particular, 211 is my absolute favorite. Why? Because I think with suicide, when you're in a crisis situation like that, if you're an individual, you're not going to remember this big long 800 number or this long 800 number, but you can remember 211. It's kind of like 911 or 411 that we used to have. So I would love to see this become common knowledge, the 211 number, because it's easy to remember, and they can connect you with resources. Their crisis hotline, they cover all of Florida. So, but you may have a consumer that is hard of hearing or only speaks Spanish. SAMHSA, the National Disaster Distress Hotline, that deals a lot with COVID, but any of these resources would, okay? So if you want to take this and put a little card in your pocket, laminate it and carry this with you, it's available on the website. You also have a flyer. And I'm hoping there's been some discussion about maybe waiver support coordinators giving out the suicide prevention flyer when someone applies for services. I think that's an excellent idea if that is something you want to do, just to give people that resource. It is on the website. I'm hoping that we'll be making that part of our application packet soon, but you don't have to wait. You could give out that suicide prevention resource flyer now to anyone who applies for services. They don't have to be currently on the wait list. And yeah, anyone that you can give this to, it can be helpful, okay? Just so they're aware of what's available to them. And that brings us to the end, but maybe not the conclusion. If anyone has any questions, I think we have about 9 minutes left. Is that correct, Elizabeth?
Yes. And while you all are jotting down Dr. Mason's information, I also just wanted to remind you that Dr. Kristen Karenko is available for contact and conversation if needed. We all have the same email address, so hers would be kristen.karenko, KORINKO @apdcares.org. If you've been on our other webinars, her contact information has been shared there as well. And as always, if you need immediate support, you contact your regional office, contact your liaison, let them know what's going on, and they will direct you to who you need to speak with. We did get a few other questions come in that from earlier that we didn't necessarily get to. So since we have a little bit of time, I do want to backtrack a little bit just to make sure that we cover all of our comments. So just bear with me as I scroll back to the chat box. We had a lot of comments come in, and some are very insightful, and some are. I'm actually just very happy that everyone commented in with their thoughts and their feelings about things. So I appreciate you for interacting with us today.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm sorry, just give me one moment as I scroll back through.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I want to reiterate that. I do appreciate questions. And to that end, please, if you want to email me again and get more resources, or you have a question you didn't get answered, you will not be bothering me at all. I'll be happy to answer. And I keep a close eye on my email, so please feel free to send that to me.
So we did have a question come in. It's pretty specific, but it might be a good conversation for a broader topic. The question is, could you detail what mental health services are available through Medicaid? But maybe, Dr. Mason, what mental health services are available, just in general, not necessarily only Medicaid options?
Yeah, so we do have options for Medicaid, and I believe right now Medicaid providers are also able to provide telehealth services, okay? Do not, again, I have heard that some Medicaid providers, when they learn that someone has a developmental disability or ID, that they are refusing treatment. That is unethical. It's not supported by science, and I wouldn't take that for an answer. I wouldn't take that no for an answer. Our population absolutely can benefit from services. So those telehealth services are available now. I think group therapy, and I don't know if anyone is doing group therapy via telehealth, and it would depend on the area you're in, but I think group sessions are so powerful, because you have your peer support, and you're helping each other. And I tell you, out of all the modes of therapy I've been involved in, I love group therapy, so that's available too. There are also organizations like volunteer.org where people can go. Now, I know that's not therapy, but we talked about finding meaning and having involvement and things like that as a way of decreasing hopelessness and despair. So being able to, if you can't find employment, being able to volunteer in some way and help other people can be very powerful thing. It gives you purpose and meaning in life. And I don't know about all of you. I think it's built in us that when we help other people, we just get this wonderful feeling inside. I think we're meant to help other people. We're social creatures. and we're meant to live in groups. And I think being able to help others is very motivating. Is anyone having a problem? I'll ask a question now, like finding mental health resources. Have you run into any roadblocks?
I think that's a great question. We do have a lot of support coordinators sending in resources that they are aware of. So one of the things that I will do is collect everyone's comments and send them to Dr. Mason, and then maybe we could put something together that includes everyone else's resources too.
That is absolutely wonderful to share those resources. And don't forget 211, because they're not just a crisis hotline, they are connected with resources throughout the state. So if you call 211, they can actually connect you with someone in your area. So that I love 211. I can't say enough good things about it. So if you're having, if you're running into roadblocks or having difficulty, the 211 website or calling 211 is an excellent resource. And I would love to see all the other resources that you guys have as well.
So to answer one of your question, Dr. Mason, we had someone chime in say that they're having trouble with income restrictions of some households that are not able to locate affordable mental health services. And we've had a few support coordinators give examples of clinics that are not treating people with ID. So I'll be sure to share those with you too.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I would really like to know the names of those clinics and the person that refused services to our population. That really gets me fighting mad. I'll be honest with you. I think that is exceptionally unethical, and you should not be refusing services to people with developmental disabilities. Now, I can understand if it is a certain program maybe that might not work for them or what have you. I can't think of what that would be right now, but I would like to know the names of those facilities so I can investigate that further.
So go ahead, keep sending your comments in. We've gotten a lot, Dr. Mason, so we will go through those together. But since it is 11 o'clock, I'm going to take back the screen control so I can talk to everyone about their credit.
Okay. And thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your thoughts and your questions and giving me your time today. Thank you.